Journey of Roman Soldiers in the War with Germania. Chapter 1. The march begins. The dawn was breaking over the Roman camp as the soldiers prepared for the most grueling and uncertain campaign of their careers. The Romans had crossed the Rhine, the natural boundary between the Roman Empire and the untamed lands of Germania. They had left behind the familiar roads of Gaul, and were now entering a realm of dense forests, murky swamps, and hostile tribes. For the Roman legions, this was a journey that would test not only their military discipline but their very will to conquer. Among the soldiers was Gaius, a young legionary who had enlisted in the Roman army eager for glory. He had fought in battles across Gaul, but now, as he looked into the dark, thick trees of Germania, he could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing on him. The Germanic tribes had been resisting Roman incursions for years, and rumors of their fierce resistance had spread through the ranks. As a young soldier, Gaius had always believed in the invincibility of Rome, but the unknown ahead made him uneasy. The general leading them, Publius Quinctilius Varus, was an experienced officer, known for his administrative skills and his loyalty to Rome. Varus was tasked with consolidating Roman control over the region. His legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, were some of the finest in the Roman army. The soldiers had drilled for months in preparation for this campaign, but the battle-ready formations that worked on open fields would be less effective in the wild forests of Germania. As the Roman soldiers broke camp and began their march into the dense forest, the ground beneath their sandals became increasingly uneven, the terrain thick with roots, brambles, and low-hanging branches. The legions were now entering the unknown, where their training would be challenged, and their resilience tested in ways they had never anticipated. Chapter 2. Tensions of the March. The deeper the Romans marched into Germania, the more the tension mounted. The soldiers were accustomed to open fields and planned tactics, but the Germanic forests were a stark contrast to the well-organized roads of Gaul. There was a growing sense of unease among the men, many of whom had never fought in such difficult terrain. The thick canopy of trees blocked out much of the sun, leaving the soldiers feeling as if they were walking in shadows. Gaius had grown accustomed to the military precision of Roman battle lines, but here in the forest, they had to march in smaller groups, moving carefully to avoid falling into the traps of the forest. The sense of discomfort was palpable, as the Roman soldiers knew they were vulnerable. Unlike the wide-open spaces of Gaul, where their formations could stretch out in perfect order, here in the woods, their military discipline felt almost useless. The trees and the thick underbrush gave the Germanic warriors an advantage. Their small, nimble bands could easily slip through the foliage, striking from hidden positions. As they advanced, Gaius couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Germans, known for their guerrilla tactics, could be lurking behind every tree, ready to strike when least expected. The Romans had already heard reports of the Germanic tribes' fierce warriors, who knew the land better than anyone. They were light-footed, quick to strike, and experts at ambushing larger, more cumbersome armies. Despite their size and strength, the Romans were vulnerable in these forests. Still, the Romans pushed forward with the unrelenting pace that characterized their military campaigns. They were Rome's most formidable fighting force, and the thought of failure never crossed their minds. As the soldiers trudged through the increasingly difficult terrain, Gaius kept his focus on his comrades, trying to push aside his fear. The Romans were disciplined, and as long as they stayed true to their training, they would triumph, he thought. Chapter 3. The First Encounter. After several days of marching through the dense forest, the Romans encountered their first real resistance. It came in the form of quick, sudden strikes from the Germanic warriors. In the early morning, as the fog still clung to the ground, Gaius and his comrades were suddenly attacked by a group of Germanic fighters. They came from the woods, darting between the trees and striking fast before retreating back into the shadows. The Roman soldiers tried to form their shields in a circle, but the quickness of the attack caught them off guard. The Germans knew how to use the forest to their advantage, launching attacks from multiple angles before disappearing again. The battle was chaotic. Roman discipline began to break down as soldiers struggled to maintain order in the face of constant harassment. Gaius fought alongside his comrades, but the enemy was elusive, appearing and disappearing like shadows. The Romans' iron shields and short swords, effective in large-scale, open-field combat, seemed less useful in these close, disorganized skirmishes. The Germans attacked swiftly and with precision, cutting down soldiers before retreating into the forest, leaving the Romans confused and frustrated. Gaius, though trained for the battlefield, was shaken by the speed and intensity of the attack. It was unlike anything he had faced before. There was no time to regroup, no time to organize. Every moment was a fight for survival. The skirmish ended when the Germanic warriors vanished as quickly as they had appeared. The Romans, though shaken, managed to regroup, but the battle had taken its toll. Several soldiers were wounded, and the morale of the legions was deeply affected. Gaius, who had once believed in the invincibility of Roman discipline, now realized that this war would not be won by strength alone. It would require more than brute force. It would require a battle of minds as well as muscles. Chapter 4. The Trap at Teutoburg Forest. After the initial skirmishes, the Romans pressed on deeper into the heart of Germania. They knew the Germanic tribes had retreated, but their presence lingered in the shadows. The sense of unease continued to grow. Every footstep in the forest seemed to be a step closer to an unseen threat. Then, after weeks of marching, the Romans fell into the trap that Arminius, the chieftain of the Cherusei tribe, had set for them. Arminius, a former Roman ally, knew exactly how to manipulate Roman tactics. Using his knowledge of the Roman legions and the forest, he led the Romans into a deep and dangerous part of the Teutoburg forest. It was here that the Germanic tribes, united under his leadership, prepared for their greatest ambush. The Roman legions, unable to form their usual battle lines, were attacked from all sides. The dense forest gave the Germanic warriors the cover they needed, and they struck relentlessly, cutting down the Romans with brutal efficiency. For Gaius, the battle was a nightmare. The Germans came from every direction, their speed and unpredictability overwhelming the Roman formations. The sound of Roman shields clashing with Germanic swords filled the air, but the Romans were outmatched. For 3 days, the Romans fought desperately to escape. Gaius, though exhausted and wounded, kept fighting, but the odds were too great. The Romans were being decimated, trapped in the forest with nowhere to run. The once mighty Roman legions were being. Chapter 5. The Aftermath and the Road Back. The aftermath of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest was one of horror and shame. Gaius and the other survivors were forced to march back through the wilderness, beaten and broken. The Roman legions had been destroyed, and the pride of the empire had been shattered. For Gaius, the journey back was filled with deep reflection. The Romans had lost more than just soldiers in that forest. They had lost their sense of invincibility. As the surviving soldiers made their way back to Roman territory, they had to contend with not just the physical toll of the battle, but the emotional weight of their defeat. The once proud legions were now scattered and demoralized. Gaius, who had once believed in the superiority of Roman might, began to question what went wrong. They had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and overwhelmed by an enemy who knew the land better than they did. The journey home was long and difficult, but it was also a moment of reckoning. The Roman Empire would never forget the lesson of Teutoburg Forest. The Germans had proven that they could resist the might of Rome, not just through strength, but through strategy and knowledge of the land. The battle for Germania had only just begun, but for Gaius and his comrades, the cost of war had never been clearer. Chapter 6. The End of Roman Ambitions in Germania. In the years that followed, Rome would attempt to retaliate. Emperor Tiberius would send more generals into Germania, and the war would continue, but it would never be the same. The Germans, despite their internal divisions, had united under Arminius's leadership and had shown that they could withstand Rome's might. The Rhine River became the natural boundary of the Roman Empire, and the dream of conquering all of Germania faded. For Gaius, the journey through Germania was one of survival and reflection. It was a journey that showed the limits of Roman power and the enduring spirit of resistance. The Germanic tribes, though not unified forever, had won the battle for their land, and their victory would echo through history as a testament to the power of the land and the will to remain free.